The scale of this is hard to wrap your head around. In 2025, it's estimated that 7.2 million Americans aged 65 and older are living with Alzheimer's dementia, and without a medical breakthrough, that number could soar to nearly 14 million by 2060. It's a disease that doesn't just touch individuals, it impacts families and all of society. With the costs of care projected to hit an incredible $384 billion in 2025 alone. But what is actually causing this devastating illness? And how does it systematically dismantle our most precious organ, the brain? The answers lie deep within the intricate wiring of our neurons a complex dance of proteins, genes, and the way we live our lives. Understanding this fight is the first step in winning it. Most people think of Alzheimer's as just losing your memory, but that's like describing an iceberg by only its tip. The reality is so much more profound. Alzheimer's is a neurodegenerative disease, meaning it causes the progressive death of brain cells. This process doesn't start when someone first forgets a name or where they put their keys. Incredibly, the toxic changes that define Alzheimer's can begin in the brain up to 2 decades before the first symptoms ever show up. It's a slow, quiet attack that unfolds in silence, long before a person or their family has any idea that something is wrong. So, let's pull back the curtain on this silent battle. Let's take a journey inside the brain to see firsthand how this disease starts, how it spreads, and how it fundamentally changes who we are. To really understand Alzheimer's, we need to be clear on what it is and what it isn't. Alzheimer's is the most common cause of dementia, making up an estimated 60% to 80% of all cases. Dementia is just an umbrella term for a group of symptoms that includes memory loss, poor judgment, and trouble with language and problem solving, all severe enough to get in the way of daily life. So, while everyone with Alzheimer's has dementia, not everyone with dementia has Alzheimer's. Other diseases can cause it, but Alzheimer's is the main one. It's also not a normal part of getting older. We all have moments of forgetfulness as we age. Misplacing keys, blanking on an acquaintance's name. These are common age-related glitches. Alzheimer's is different. It's a disease. It involves the death of brain cells and the connections between them, which leads to a decline that is far more severe and relentless. Imagine your memory isn't just a filing cabinet, but a living library where every book is a memory, a skill, or a piece of your personality. In normal aging, you might occasionally misplace a book, or take a little longer to find the one you want. With Alzheimer's, the library itself is being slowly dismantled. First, the librarian in charge of shelving new books' short-term memory starts to slip. That's why recent events are often the first to go. But as the disease moves on, whole sections of the library long-term memories, language, reason begin to crumble, until the very structure is gone. The effects are widespread. A person's ability to understand, think, and communicate becomes damaged. This can affect their ability to make decisions, follow a conversation, or do simple tasks that were once second nature. But it goes beyond just thinking. The disease can also reshape moods and emotions. Someone might become apathetic, losing interest in hobbies they once cherished, or they might become anxious, irritable, or withdrawn. In the later stages, as the damage spreads, the brain loses its ability to control the body, affecting balance and coordination until individuals need help with the most basic parts of life, like eating and bathing. Alzheimer's doesn't just steal memories, it steals a person's independence, and ultimately, their life. So, what's happening on a microscopic level to cause all this destruction? To understand that we need to meet the 2 main villains in the Alzheimer's story, beta-amyloid plaques and tau tangles. In a healthy brain, tens of billions of neurons are in constant communication, firing signals that let us think, feel, move, and remember. It's a symphony of incredible complexity. Now, imagine 2 saboteurs working to shut it down. Our first villain is a protein fragment called beta-amyloid. Normally, this protein is created, does its job, and gets cleared away. But in Alzheimer's disease, something goes wrong with this cleanup process. For reasons we're still working to understand, these beta-amyloid fragments start sticking together, forming clumps. Eventually, they build up into dense, hard deposits called amyloid plaques. Think of it like plaque on your teeth, but much more sinister. These amyloid plaques gather in the spaces between the neurons. As they build up, they act like gunk in the gears, disrupting the signals that jump from one neuron to the next. This communication breakdown is one of the earliest steps in the disease. These plaques are also toxic to brain cells and are thought to trigger inflammation, a defensive response from the brain's immune system that, when it becomes chronic, just causes more damage. Now for villain number 2, a protein called tau. In a healthy neuron, tau has a critical job. It acts like the ties on a railroad track, stabilizing internal highways called microtubules. These microtubules are the neuron's shipping network, moving nutrients and other essential molecules throughout the cell. Without this system, the neuron would starve and die. In Alzheimer's, the tau protein goes haywire. It detaches from the microtubule tracts and starts to misfold, twisting into tangled threads. These abnormal tau proteins then clump together inside the neuron, forming what we call neurofibrillary tangles, or just tau tangles. When this happens, the railroad tracks fall apart. The transport system collapses, cutting the neuron off from its lifeline. The neuron can't function. Its connections to other cells wither, and eventually it dies. For a long time, scientists have debated which of these villains really drives the disease. The amyloid cascade hypothesis suggests that the buildup of amyloid plaques is the first domino to fall, which then triggers the tau tangles and all the damage that follows. But, like most things in biology, it's not quite that simple. Some people have amyloid plaques in their brains, but show no signs of dementia. And while new drugs that clear amyloid have shown a modest slowing of cognitive decline, it suggests amyloid is a huge piece of the puzzle, but maybe not the only one. What is clear is that plaques and tangles work together in a destructive partnership. Research suggests that as amyloid levels hit a tipping point, it kicks off a rapid spread of tau throughout the brain. This spread is predictable. It often starts in memory centers before advancing to other regions. And this destructive march is what leads to the progressive worsening of symptoms. The microscopic assault from plaques and tangles has devastating consequences, you can see. As billions of neurons die, the brain networks they form break down. This widespread cell death causes the brain to physically shrink in a process called atrophy. If you saw a healthy brain next to the brain of someone in the late stages of Alzheimer's, the difference is shocking. The healthy brain is plump and dense with tight folds. The Alzheimer's brain, however, is noticeably smaller, with deep, widened grooves and shrunken ridges, especially in areas vital for memory and thinking. A significant amount of brain volume is just gone. One of the first and hardest hit areas is the hippocampus. This seahorse-shaped structure is the command center for learning and making new memories. The damage here is why trouble with short-term memory, like forgetting a recent conversation, is typically one of the very first signs of Alzheimer's. The brain is losing its ability to write new information to the disk. From there, the damage spreads. It moves into the cerebral cortex, the brain's outer layer responsible for language, reasoning, and social behavior. When the disease hits the frontal lobe, our center for personality and judgment, we might see behavior changes. A person who was once thoughtful might become irritable or withdrawn. When it reaches the language centers, a person might struggle to find the right words. As it moves into the parietal lobe, it can disrupt a person's sense of spatial awareness, causing them to get lost in places they've known their whole life. This progression explains the stages of the disease. In the early stage, the damage is mostly in memory centers. By the moderate stage, as the shrinkage becomes more widespread, problems with language, reasoning, and recognizing loved ones appear. In the final severe stage, the damage is so extensive that the brain has shrunk dramatically. Patients lose the ability to communicate and become completely dependent on others for care, as the brain can no longer direct the body. It's the physical result of a mind being erased. We've covered the how, the plaques, tangles, and brain shrinkage. But that leads to the biggest question. Why? Why does this all start? The short answer is that Alzheimer's is a multifactorial disease. For most people, it's not one single thing, but a complex mix of genes, lifestyle, and environmental factors that build up over a lifetime. Let's start with genetics. For a very small fraction of people, less than 1%, Alzheimer's is a deterministic inherited disease. This is called familial Alzheimer's, and it's caused by rare mutations in one of 3 specific genes. If you inherit one of these mutations, you're almost certain to develop the disease, often much younger. Sometimes in your 40s or 50s. For the vast majority who get Alzheimer's later in life, genetics plays a role of risk, not certainty. The most significant genetic risk factor we know of is a gene called APOE. We all have this gene, but it comes in different versions. The ApoE4 version is the one linked to a higher risk. Getting 1 copy from a parent increases your risk. Getting 2 copies, 1 from each parent, increases it even more. But it's critical to know that ApoE4 is a risk factor, not a guarantee. Plenty of people with this gene never get Alzheimer's, and many who have Alzheimer's don't have this gene. It just tilts the odds. Beyond our genes, the single biggest risk factor for Alzheimer's is simply age. The risk of developing the disease roughly doubles every 5 years after 65. But again, Alzheimer's is not a normal part of aging. It's a disease that just becomes more common as we get older. This is where lifestyle and environment come in, and this is where we have incredible power. Research has shown that what's bad for our hearts is also bad for our brains. Things like high blood pressure, high cholesterol, obesity, and type 2 diabetes, especially in midlife, significantly raise the risk of Alzheimer's later on. The health of our blood vessels, which supply the brain with oxygen and nutrients, is absolutely essential. And the list of things we can change doesn't stop there. A growing pile of evidence points to other lifestyle choices. A history of head injury, hearing loss, untreated depression, and social isolation have all been linked to a higher risk. On the flip side, a healthy lifestyle can be profoundly protective. In fact, a major report from the Lancet Commission suggested that addressing 14 specific lifestyle factors could potentially prevent or delay up to 45% of dementia cases. So what are these protective factors? They're probably things you've heard before. Regular exercise, like at least 150 minutes of moderate activity a week, a healthy diet like the Mediterranean diet, quitting smoking, and drinking in moderation. Studies have shown that people who adopt 4 or 5 of these healthy behaviors can lower their risk of Alzheimer's by as much as 60%. But it's not just physical health. It's also about staying mentally and socially active. Challenging your brain by reading, learning a new skill, or playing games helps build what's called cognitive reserve. Think of it as a buffer. By building stronger and more plentiful connections between neurons, your brain becomes more resilient and can better withstand the damage of Alzheimer's before symptoms start to appear. The picture of Alzheimer's is daunting, but it's far from hopeless. The world of Alzheimer's research is more vibrant and promising than ever before. For the first time, we have drugs that can actually modify the disease. A new class of treatments, monoclonal antibodies like lecanemab and donanemab, have been approved. These drugs work by targeting and clearing amyloid plaques from the brain. They aren't a cure, but clinical trials have shown they can modestly slow the pace of cognitive decline for people in the early stages, essentially buying patients more time. These drugs are a monumental step forward, proving that the underlying disease process can be changed, and they're just the beginning. The research pipeline is full of new strategies targeting other parts of the disease, from tau tangles and inflammation to protecting the brain's blood supply. At the same time, a revolution is happening in diagnostics. Researchers are developing simple blood tests that can spot the protein signs of Alzheimer's years before symptoms appear. This will make early diagnosis easier and more accessible, which is vital for future treatments to work best. Finally, the most powerful tool we have right now is prevention. The realization that up to 45% of dementia cases might be preventable through lifestyle changes is a profound message of empowerment. The choices we make every day, what we eat, how we move, how we challenge our minds, and how we connect with others can all help lower our risk and build a more resilient brain. The silent battle of Alzheimer's is a complex and challenging one. It's a disease born from a cascade of changes in the brain, influenced by our genes and shaped by the lives we lead. It systematically unravels the mind, stealing the very things that make us who we are. But that silence is being broken. Scientists are unraveling its deepest secrets, finding new ways to diagnose it earlier and treat it more effectively. And every one of us has a role to play. By understanding what causes it and what the risk factors are, we can make choices to protect our own brain health. If you or a loved one are concerned about memory loss, it's so important to talk to a doctor. Early diagnosis is key. For more information and support, please visit the Alzheimer's Association or the National Institute on Aging. The fight isn't over, and with continued research and a shared commitment to brain health, it's a fight we can one day win. Thank you for watching.